My name is Eudora Maybelline Crowell. I am 81 years old. I live in a quiet retirement neighborhood outside a small town in northern Iowa where the winters are long and the silence feels heavier than snow. People here know me as the old woman who walks slowly with a cane and still waves at passing school buses. They do not know the storms I survived. They do not know the words that shattered my life long after I thought pain had finished with me. I married late. I was 48 when I finally wore a white dress. By then most women I knew were already grandmothers. I never had children, not because I did not want them, because my body never allowed me to carry life inside it. Every doctor visit ended the same way. Soft voices, apologies, cold hands folding papers I never wanted to read. Still I loved deeply. I loved fiercely. And I believed love would be enough. That belief is why I am sitting here today with my heart racing as if I am that broken 48-year-old woman again. Because earlier this morning my husband leaned close to my ear and said something so cruel, so deliberate that it changed everything I thought I knew about my life. Before I tell you how that moment unfolded, I want to welcome you properly. If you enjoy emotional stories that feel real, stories about love, loss, betrayal, and quiet strength, then this channel is for you. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful story like this one. Also tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel and who is sitting with me as I tell them. Now let me take you back to the moment it all began. This morning the sun came through the kitchen window in pale yellow strips. I was standing at the counter slicing apples for oatmeal. My hands were slower now. Arthritis makes every small movement feel like a negotiation. Behind me I heard his footsteps. Heavy. Familiar. Still capable of making my shoulders tense even after all these years. My husband is named Calder Boone. He is 84. We met at a church fundraiser decades ago. He wore a navy blazer and smelled like Old Spice and tobacco. He told me I had kind eyes. No one had said that to me in years. Calder had been married before. He had grown children. A son named Rexton and a daughter named Paloma. They were already adults when I met him. Polite enough. Distant. They never called me stepmother. Just Eudora. Always Eudora. When Calder and I married, I told him everything. About my infertility. About the years of quiet grief. About how I used to sit in parked cars watching other women unload toddlers from minivans and wonder what I had done wrong to deserve emptiness. He held my hands and promised me it did not matter. He said love did not need children to be real. He said we would build a life full of meaning anyway. For many years I believed him. This morning he stood behind me and cleared his throat. "You cut them too thick," he said. I said nothing. I adjusted the slices. I learned long ago that silence was safer. Then he laughed. Not warmly. Not kindly. "You know," he said, "sometimes I think God spared you children for a reason." My knife froze mid-air. Turned slowly. "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned against the counter and looked at me with eyes that suddenly felt like strangers. "You were never meant to be a mother, Eudora," he said flatly. "You would have failed at it anyway." The words hit me like ice water. I felt my chest tighten. My ears rang. For a moment I thought I might fall. "That is a terrible thing to say," I whispered. He shrugged. "Truth hurts," he replied. Then he added the sentence that cracked something open inside me that I did not know was still alive. "If you had given me a real family, maybe my kids would not treat you like a ghost." I stared at him. 43 years of pain flashed behind my eyes. Every pregnancy announcement. Every empty nursery I never built. Every silent holiday where I smiled through questions I could not answer. I waited for him to say he was sorry. He did not. Instead he walked out of the kitchen and left me alone with apples turning brown on the counter. That was the moment my life split in two. But to understand why those words mattered so much, you need to know who I was before Calder. Before marriage. Before 81-year-old Eudora with a cane and quiet rage. I grew up on a failing farm in southern Missouri. My father drank. My mother prayed. We had little money and even less tenderness. I learned early that love was something you earned by being useful and quiet. I married my first love at 22. His name was Lowell Dane. He died in a highway accident 3 years later. We had tried for a baby during those 3 years. I blamed myself when nothing happened. I was young and did not know that some wounds are invisible. After Lowell died, I spent decades alone. I worked as a medical records clerk, paid my bills, lived small. I told myself companionship was overrated. Then Calder arrived with his slow smile and practiced charm. He said he admired my independence. He said I was strong. What he did not say was that he expected gratitude, compliance, silence. Over time the small comments began. You should be thankful I married you. At your age most men would not bother. My kids come first, you understand that, right? I swallowed those words like bitter pills. When Rexton and Paloma visited, they spoke around me, not to me. They rearranged my furniture. They corrected my cooking. They once suggested I move into the guest room so their father could have more space. Calder never defended me. I told myself it was enough to have a roof, to have company, to not die alone. But this morning something shifted. After he left the kitchen, I sat down at the table and cried into my hands. Not loud, not dramatic, just deep silent tears that soaked into skin already lined with age. Then I did something I had not done in years. I opened the old cedar chest in the bedroom. Inside were letters, old photographs, documents, pieces of my life Calder never cared to know. At the bottom was a manila envelope labeled Eudora Crowell Legal. I stared at it for a long time. Because inside that envelope was a truth Calder never bothered to ask about. A truth his children never imagined. A truth that would soon change everything. As I held the envelope in my shaking hands, I heard Calder calling my name from the living room. Eudora, he shouted. Where are you? I did not answer. I was finally done being useful. Done being quiet. And as I opened the envelope, I realized something that made my heart pound with a strange new feeling. Oh. Because Calder Boone had no idea what he had just awakened. And when he finds out the truth about the woman, he dismissed the woman, he belittled the woman he thought was nothing. Without children his world will never be the same. If you want to know what was inside that envelope and how one sentence from an old man triggered the most powerful chapter of my life, then stay with me. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. My hands trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to Calder's footsteps moving back and forth in the living room. He was impatient. He always had been. He liked answers when he wanted them, not when I was ready to give them. I did not move. Inside the envelope were documents I had not touched in years. My name typed neatly. Signatures. Proof of a life I built quietly, without applause, without witnesses. Proof that I was never as powerless as Calder believed. But before I tell you what those papers meant, I need to take you back again. Back to the years after Lowell died. Back to the version of me who learned how to survive alone. After my first husband's funeral, I moved north. I could not stay in Missouri. Every road reminded me of him. Every diner booth felt haunted. I took a job offer in Illinois, then another in Iowa. Filing records, sorting lives into folders. Birth, marriages, divorces. I spent my days organizing other people's beginnings and endings while mine felt permanently paused. It was during those years that I learned something important. Being childless did not mean being empty. I volunteered at a public library on weekends. I learned about local history. I became the woman people asked for help when they needed forms filled out or letters typed. I saved money carefully. Every paycheck I set a little aside. Not for vacations. Not for jewelry. For security. I watched women my age struggle after divorces. I saw widows lose homes because they trusted the wrong relatives. I made myself a promise. No matter what happened to me, I would never be helpless. When I turned 58, I bought my first small property. It was nothing fancy. A rundown duplex outside Cedar Falls. Everyone told me it was a mistake. A single woman. No kids. No backup plan. I fixed it slowly. One unit I rented. One I lived in. Then I bought another. And another. I learned about property taxes and insurance. I learned when to trust and when to walk away. I never told Calder any of this in detail. When we met, he liked the idea of me being simple, modest, uncomplicated. He liked that I did not ask for much. So I let him believe that. Back in the bedroom, Calder called my name again, louder this time. Eudora, where did you go? I folded the documents back into the envelope and stood up. My knees ached. My back protested. But something inside me was steadier than it had been in years. I walked out to the living room. He was standing near the window, arms crossed, irritation etched deep into his face. What took you so long? He asked. I looked at him. Really looked. The man who once promised kindness. The man who now treated me like a burden that refused to disappear. I needed a moment, I said calmly. He scoffed. You always need a moment. I said nothing. Silence unnerved him more than arguments ever had. He cleared his throat. Look, Eudora, I might have been harsh earlier, but you need to understand how things look from my side. Waited. My kids, he continued, they never bonded with you. That is not my fault. You came into our lives late. You cannot expect. I raised a hand. Slowly. Deliberately. Enough, I said. He stopped mid-sentence. Shock flashed across his face. I had never interrupted him before. I am tired, I continued. Tired of apologizing for things I could not control. Tired of being reminded of what I never had. Tired of being treated like I owe you something for choosing me. His mouth opened, then closed. You are being dramatic, he said. I smiled sadly. No, Calder, I said. I am being honest. He shook his head. You are too sensitive, Eudora. Always have been. There it was. The phrase he used whenever I was hurt. As if pain were a character flaw. I turned away and walked back to the bedroom. This time I locked the door. My heart was pounding, but not with fear. With clarity. That night we slept in separate rooms. In the darkness I stared at the ceiling and thought about the little girl I used to be. The one who believed silence was safety. I realized something then. Silence had protected me once. But now it was suffocating me. The next morning Calder left early. He did not say goodbye. He slammed the door harder than necessary. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the envelope open in front of me. Inside were deeds, bank statements, a will I had written years ago and updated quietly. There were names on it Calder had never heard. A woman named Lucinda Gray. A young man named Tomas Bell. People who had shown me kindness without expecting ownership. I thought about Calder's children. Rexton with his sharp suits and sharper tone. Paloma with her fake smiles and constant reminders that I was not their mother. They assumed everything Calder had was theirs by right. They assumed I was an accessory. Footnote. They were wrong. But I was not ready to reveal that yet. Later that week Paloma visited. She did not knock. She never did. She let herself in like she owned the place. Dad said you have been difficult lately, she said as she set her purse down. I looked up from my book. Is that what he said? She sighed. You need to understand, Eudora, he is old. Stress is bad for him. You should not upset him with arguments. I studied her face. She looked like her father. The same dismissive eyes. I have been married to your father for over 30 years, I said softly. I think I understand stress. She waved a hand. That is not what I meant. I mean, you need to remember your place in this family. There it was again. Place. Closed my book. My place, I repeated. Yes, she said impatiently. You are not his first family. You did not raise us. You did not sacrifice. I stood up. Enough, I said. She blinked. Excuse me. You are a guest in my home, I said evenly. You will speak to me with respect or you will leave. Her mouth fell open. Your home, she laughed. This is Dad's house. Took a breath. Is it, I asked. She frowned. What is that supposed to mean? I walked to the sideboard and picked up a framed photo. It was old. Calder and me on our wedding day. Do you know why your father married me? I asked. She rolled her eyes. Because you were available. He nodded. That is what he thinks too. She crossed her arms. What are you implying? I set the photo down carefully. Nothing yet, I said. But one day you will understand. She left in a huff, muttering under her breath. That night Calder confronted me. Paloma says you were rude, he said. I looked at him calmly. She was rude to me. He shook his head. You need to stop making trouble, Eudora. At your age, peace should be your priority. Smiled. Peace is my priority, I said. That is why things are going to change. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I met his gaze. You will see. That was the first night he looked uncertain. Weeks passed. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped rearranging my schedule around his moods. I began leaving the house alone, visiting people, making calls. Calder noticed. You are being distant, he said one evening. I am being myself, I replied. He did not like that answer. One afternoon I visited Lucinda Gray at the assisted living center across town. She was 92, sharp as a tack. She squeezed my hand and smiled. It is about time you stopped shrinking, she said. I laughed softly. I am scared, I admitted. Good, she said. Fear means you are alive. When I got home, Calder was sitting at the kitchen table. We need to talk, he said. I sat across from him. I am listening. He leaned forward. I do not like the way things are going. You are acting like you do not need me. I folded my hands. I do not need you, Calder. Choose you. Or at least I used to. That hurt him. Could see it. You would be nothing without me, he snapped. No children. No legacy. I felt the old pain flare then settle. You are wrong, I said quietly. He laughed. Prove it. I thought of the envelope. The documents. The truth waiting patiently. Soon, I said. I will. That night as he slept, I lay awake planning. Not revenge. Resolution. I was 81 years old. I had wasted enough time being invisible. And as winter settled over Iowa, something else was taking shape. Reckoning. Winter arrived early that year. The kind of winter that crept into your bones and stayed there. Snow piled against the porch railings. The world outside our house went quiet, as if holding its breath. Inside, the silence between Calder and me grew louder than any argument we had ever had. We spoke only when necessary. Practical words. Cold words. Coffee is ready. Mail came. Your pills are on the counter. Nothing more. I slept better than I expected. For the first time in years, my dreams were not crowded with apologies I never owed. One afternoon, while Calder was napping in his recliner, I drove into town. The roads were slick, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I parked outside a brick building with faded lettering that read Hawthorne and Keel Attorneys at Law. I had not been there in nearly a decade. Inside, the smell of paper and lemon cleaner greeted me. A young receptionist looked up. Can I help you? I gave her my name. Her eyes widened slightly. You are Mrs. Crowell. Mr. Hawthorne asked us to call him if you ever came back. Moments later, an older man with silver hair stepped out of his office. His smile was warm. Eudora, he said. You look exactly the same. I laughed softly. You are a terrible liar. He gestured me inside. What brings you back? I sat down and placed the envelope on his desk. It is time, I said. He nodded, as if he had been waiting years to hear those words. We spent hours reviewing documents, properties, accounts, trust. He explained everything carefully, respectfully. He did not speak to me like I was old or confused. He spoke to me like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. At the end he leaned back. You understand that once this is set in motion there is no going back. I met his eyes. I have spent my whole life going forward quietly, I said. I am not afraid anymore. When I left the office the sky had darkened. Snow began to fall again. But I felt lighter than I had in decades. At home Calder was awake. Where were you? He asked sharply. I took off my coat. Running errands. What errands? Personal ones. He frowned. You are hiding something. I looked at him. I always was, he just never cared enough to notice. That night he slept poorly. I could hear him tossing, mumbling. He sensed change the way animals sense storms. A week later Rexton came to visit. He arrived unannounced like his sister. Broad. His presence filled rooms in an uncomfortable way. We need to talk, he said without greeting. I gestured to the chair. He did not. Dad says you have been acting strange. I smiled faintly. Strange how? Cold. Distant. Making threats. I raised an eyebrow. Threats? He crossed his arms. You keep saying things will change. That sounds like a threat. Leaned back. No, Rexton, I said calmly. Sounds like a promise. His jaw tightened. You need to understand something, Eudora. Everything Dad has comes to us. That is how families work. I studied him. A grown man who had never once asked how I was doing. Who had never wondered what my life was before his father. Families work in many ways, I replied. He stepped closer. Do not get ideas about inheritance. You are not blood. The words were meant to wound. They missed their mark. I stood slowly. This conversation is over, I said. You will leave now. He laughed. Or what? I looked at him steadily. Or you will learn something you are not ready to hear. For the first time uncertainty flickered across his face. He left without another word. Calder was furious when he heard. You embarrassed him, he shouted. You embarrassed me. I stood in the doorway. You allowed them to disrespect me for 30 years, I said. I am done accepting that. He pointed a finger at me. You think you have power now. I met his gaze. I always did. I just forgot. That night he slept on the couch. Days turned into weeks. My routines changed. I began walking in the mornings again. Slow laps around the block. Neighbors waved. One woman stopped me. You seem different, she said. Lighter. Smiled. One morning a letter arrived. Official. I knew what it was before I opened it. Calder was watching from his chair. What is that, he asked. Mail, I said. He leaned forward. Let me see it. I did not. I placed it in my bag. Not your concern. That was the moment fear entered his eyes. Later that evening he confronted me again. Are you planning something behind my back, he demanded. I set down my teacup. Calder, I said evenly. You stopped being entitled to my inner life a long time ago. He slammed his hand on the table. I am your husband. He nodded. You are a man I married. That does not make you my owner. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You would be nothing without my name, he said bitterly. I smiled softly. You never asked what my name carried before you borrowed it. He had no answer. The truth was beginning to press against the surface. I could feel it, like water behind a dam. That night I dreamed of the duplex in Cedar Falls. Of the keys in my hand. Of the first tenant who hugged me and cried because she finally had a safe place to live. I woke with tears on my cheeks. Not of sadness. Of release. In the weeks that followed, Calder grew smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. His words lost their edge. His authority faded as mine returned. Then came the phone call that changed the pace of everything. It was from Hawthorne. "We are ready," he said. "Whenever you are." I looked at Calder across the room. He was reading the paper. Comfortable. Unaware. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow is good." That night I cooked dinner. A real dinner. His favorite. He noticed. "You are being nice," he said suspiciously. Smiled. "I am being final." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "You will understand tomorrow," I replied. He slept well that night. I did not. I lay awake listening to the wind, thinking about the girl I used to be, the woman I became, the grandmother figure I was to people who never shared my blood but shared my life. Morning came. Calder dressed neatly. "Where are we going?" he asked. I picked up my coat. "To town," I said. "To settle things." He smiled smugly. "About time you accepted reality." I said nothing. The car ride was quiet. Snow lined the roads like witnesses. When we pulled up outside Hawthorne and Kiel, Calder frowned. "Why are we here?" I turned off the engine. "Because today you are going to learn who you married." His confidence wavered. Inside, the conference room was warm. Papers were laid out neatly. Hawthorne stood and shook my hand. "Good morning, Eudora." Calder bristled. "What is this?" Hawthorne gestured for us to sit. "Mrs. Crowell has asked us to review her assets and make certain declarations official." Calder laughed. "Her assets? You mean ours?" Hawthorne glanced at me. "May I proceed?" He nodded. As Hawthorne began to speak, Calder's smile slowly vanished. "Properties. Counts. Trust. Calder's face drained of color. "That is impossible," he whispered. Hawthorne looked at him kindly. "Sir, your wife has been financially independent since before your marriage." Calder turned to me. "You lied to me." I met his gaze. "You never asked." His mouth opened then closed. Rexton and Paloma burst in moments later, summoned by Calder in a panic. "What is going on?" Paloma demanded. Hawthorne continued calmly. "Mrs. Crowell has revised her will." Rexton scoffed. "That does not matter. Dad gets everything." Hawthorne shook his head. "No, sir. He does not." The room went silent. I folded my hands. "I am not leaving you destitute, Calder," I said quietly. "But I am reclaiming what is mine." Calder stared at me like a stranger. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. I looked at him with sadness, not anger. "Because when you told me I would have been a failure as a mother, you proved something. That you never deserved the family you think you own." The truth landed heavily. And that was only the beginning. The room felt smaller after the truth came out. Not because the walls moved, but because the lies had nowhere left to hide. Calder sat stiff in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as if the furniture were the only thing keeping him upright. Rexton's face had turned a sharp shade of red. Paloma's lips trembled, not with sadness, but with fury. "This is a setup," Rexton snapped. "You tricked him." I did not raise my voice. "No," I said calmly. "I protected myself." Paloma turned to her father. "Dad, tell her this is wrong. Tell her she cannot do this." Calder opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I had known him, he did not have the authority he was used to. The confidence that once filled his chest had drained out, leaving behind an old man who had underestimated the woman beside him. Hawthorne spoke gently. "Mrs. Crowell's assets were acquired independently and legally. She has every right to decide how they are distributed." Rexton scoffed. "She was married into this family." I looked at him. "Marriage does not erase a woman's past," I said. "It does not erase her work. And it does not erase her worth." Paloma's voice cracked. "So what happens now?" I inhaled slowly. "Now," I said, "I stop pretending." The meeting ended shortly after. Rexton stormed out first, his footsteps heavy with anger. Paloma followed, shooting me a look that carried years of resentment I never caused. Calder lingered. In the hallway outside the conference room, he finally spoke. "You humiliated me." I looked at him sadly. "No, Calder. You humiliated yourself. I simply stopped protecting your illusion." We drove home in silence. The snow had stopped falling, but the roads were slick with ice. Calder stared out the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. At home, he went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the clock tick. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the release of decades of tension. That night I slept deeply. The days that followed were not easy. Calder grew quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The dangerous kind. He avoided my eyes. He skipped meals. He spent hours on the phone with his children, whispering behind closed doors. I heard my name more than once. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Rexton's lawyer. Hawthorne read it and sighed. "They are contesting nothing," he said. "They are just trying to intimidate you." He nodded. "I expected that." "You okay?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Have lived 81 years. I am not afraid of grown children throwing tantrums." Calder, however, was unraveling. One evening he confronted me in the living room. "You have turned my children against me," he said bitterly. I shook my head. "No, Calder. I simply refuse to be your shield anymore." He sank into a chair. "They think I was weak," he murmured. I sat across from him. "You were not weak. You were careless with another human being's heart." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw something like regret. "I did not know you were capable of all this," he said quietly. "That is because you never wanted to know me," I replied. Weeks passed. Calder's health began to decline. He missed medications, skipped appointments. Pride made him careless. One night he collapsed in the hallway. Called an ambulance. At the hospital, the nurse looked at me kindly. "Do you have family?" she asked. I hesitated. "Have people," I said. That was the truth. Lucinda visited me the next day. "You did not abandon him," she observed. "You simply stopped abandoning yourself." He nodded. He came home weaker, quieter. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Rexton and Paloma visited again, this time with forced politeness. "Dad should move in with me," Rexton said. "He needs real care." I looked at Calder. "What do you want?" I asked him. He swallowed. "I do not know." I placed my hand on his. "You spent years deciding for everyone else. Now you get to decide for yourself." That was a kindness he did not deserve, but one I gave anyway. He chose to stay. But things were never the same. I reclaimed rooms. I rearranged furniture. I redecorated the guest room into a study. My study. I wrote letters. Old friends. New connections. I donated quietly. Helped fund scholarships for girls who grew up like I did. One afternoon a young woman named Maribel knocked on my door. "Mrs. Crowell," she said nervously. "Mr. Hawthorne said you might help me." She was a single mother, trying to leave an unsafe situation. I listened. I did not interrupt. I remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Helped her. Calder watched all of this with a mix of confusion and awe. "You are different," he said one night. Smiled. "I am myself." His children visited less often. When they did, they were careful, respectful. They had learned that entitlement does not survive truth. Months passed. Then one evening, Calder spoke words I never expected to hear. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "For what I said. For what I took." I looked at him for a long time. "I accept your apology," I said. "But forgiveness does not restore what was broken." He nodded. "No." That was the moment I realized something important. I did not need revenge. I already had justice and peace. But life was not finished testing us yet. Because soon a decision would have to be made. One that would define how our story truly ended. And when that moment came, it would not be Calder who held the power. It would be me. Spring came slowly, like it was unsure whether it was welcome. The snow melted in patches, revealing grass that looked tired but alive. Birds returned to the trees outside the kitchen window. Their songs felt almost rude against the quiet tension still living inside the house. Calder moved differently now. Slower. Softer. As if afraid that one wrong word might finish what little ground he had left. He no longer corrected me. No longer barked orders. When he spoke, it was tentative, like a guest unsure of the rules. I noticed everything. The way he waited for me to sit before sitting himself. The way he asked instead of assumed. The way he flinched when I grew quiet. Power changes people. Losing it changes them even more. One morning, as I poured coffee, he cleared his throat. "Eudora," he said. I was thinking. I looked at him. "That is new," I replied gently. He gave a weak smile. "I deserve that." Waited. "I think it might be best if I moved into assisted living," he said. "Just for a while." The word surprised me, though I did not show it. "Is that what you want?" I asked. He stared at the table. "I think it is what I need. You should not have to take care of me after everything." There was no manipulation in his voice. Just resignation. I nodded slowly. "If that is your choice," I said, "I will support it." His eyes filled with something close to gratitude. "Thank you." We toured facilities together. I let him lead. Let him choose. He ended up selecting a modest place not far from town. Nothing luxurious. Nothing grand. Felt fitting. The day he moved out, the house breathed differently. Lighter. Like it had been holding its breath for decades and finally exhaled. I stood alone in the living room after he left. Sunlight touched the walls. I realized something then. For the first time since I was 22 years old, I lived alone again. And I was not lonely. I began to fill my days with intention. I joined a community board. Volunteered twice a week. I started teaching basic budgeting classes at the library. Women my age. Younger women. Even a few men. They listened. They respected me. One afternoon a girl stayed behind after class. She was barely 20. "My mom says women without kids have no purpose," she said quietly. I looked at her gently. "Purpose is not something you inherit," I said. "It is something you build." She nodded, tears in her eyes. That night I cried too. Not from sadness. From knowing that my life had mattered in ways I had never allowed myself to see. Calder's children visited him at the facility. Not as often as they claimed they would. I heard about it through staff who knew me. They fight, he told me once during a visit. About money mostly. I said nothing. That chapter of my life was closed. Or so I thought. One afternoon Hawthorne called. "Eudora," he said carefully. "There has been a development." I listened. "Calder has amended his will. He wants to speak with you." Closed my eyes. "I will come tomorrow," I said. When I arrived at the facility, Calder looked smaller than ever. Frail. The man who once filled rooms with authority now seemed swallowed by them. He motioned for me to sit. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I am listening." He took a breath. "I spent my life thinking legacy meant blood. Children. A name that continued after me." He swallowed. "I was wrong." Waited. "You built something without demanding recognition," he continued. "You loved without ownership. You endured without bitterness." His voice cracked. "I want to leave what I can to causes you care about. To people who need it." I studied him. "Because I finally understand what you meant when you said I did not deserve the family I thought I owned." Tears slipped down his face. "I ruined what I had by believing love was owed to me." I placed my hand over his. "This is not about punishment," I said. It is about truth. He nodded. No. When I left that day, I felt something close to closure. But life still had one final test waiting. A test that would define not just how I survived, but how I won. The call came at dawn. I was awake already, sitting at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the pale blue light creep across the sky. Old habits die slowly. Even with peace in my life, my body still remembered years of waking early to anticipate other people's needs. The phone rang. Insistent. Mrs. Crowell, the voice said. This is Maple Hollow Assisted Living. It is your husband. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not panic. What happened? I asked calmly. He had a stroke during the night. He is stable but confused. We need you to come. Closed my eyes. I will be there shortly, I said. The drive felt longer than usual. Every mile gave me time to think. About anger. About forgiveness. About the strange way love can survive even after respect has been shattered. At the facility, the nurse led me down a quiet hallway. Calder lay in the bed, smaller than ever. His face drooped on one side. His eyes fluttered when he saw me. Eudora, he whispered. Came. Of course I did, I said softly. Rexton and Paloma arrived soon after. Their footsteps were hurried. Their voices sharp with fear they did not know how to soften. Why did no one call us sooner? Rexton demanded. The nurse replied evenly. Mrs. Crowell is listed as the primary contact. Paloma turned toward me, eyes flashing. You planned this. You pushed him here. You isolated him. I stood slowly. Lower your voice, I said. This is not about you. She scoffed. It is always about you now. Ever since you decided to take everything. Felt no anger. Only clarity. I did not take anything, I said. I stopped giving it away. Rexton stepped closer. If Dad dies, this ends. Everything reverts to us. I looked at him steadily. Well, does not. The doctor entered then, interrupting the tension. He explained Calder's condition. Recovery was possible but uncertain. Decisions would need to be made. Who has medical power of attorney? He asked. I spoke quietly. You do. Rexton froze. But Calder insisted on it years ago, I said. Back when he trusted me to put him first. Before he forgot what that meant. The doctor nodded and continued speaking to me. Rexton exploded. This is unbelievable. She manipulated him. I turned to Calder. Do you want them to decide for you? I asked gently. His eyes filled with tears. No, he whispered. Please no. That was the end of the argument. The days that followed were exhausting. Paperwork. Therapy sessions. Long hours by his bedside. I did not do it out of obligation. I did it because I could choose compassion without surrendering myself. Calder improved slowly. Speech returned in fragments. His hand squeezed mine when he could not find words. One afternoon he looked at me with sudden clarity. You stayed, he said. Even after everything. He nodded. Because leaving would have made me someone I am not. He closed his eyes. I wish I had known you sooner. I smiled sadly. You knew me. You just did not listen. Rexton and Paloma grew more distant. When they visited, they stayed only minutes. They spoke of work, of inconvenience, of stress. Calder noticed. They do not like seeing me like this, he said quietly. I squeezed his hand. Illness strips away illusions, I replied. That can be painful. One evening after a long day, I returned home to an empty house that no longer felt hollow. I sat in my favorite chair and realized something startling. I was not waiting for my life to begin. It already had. Weeks later, Calder was strong enough to talk for longer periods. One afternoon he asked me something unexpected. "Will you forgive me?" he asked. Thought carefully. "Forgiveness is not a gift you ask for," I said. "It is something you earn by becoming better." He nodded. "I am trying." I saw that he was. That night I wrote letters. One to Lucinda. One to Maribel. One to the library board. I revised plans. Adjusted trust. Not out of fear. Out of purpose. I realized then that motherhood is not defined by birth. It is defined by care. And I had been a mother in 100 quiet ways. The final reckoning was still coming. But it would not be loud. It would be gentle. And it would be mine. Summer arrived like a soft apology. The heat rolled in slowly, warming the old bones of the house and my own. The garden I had neglected for years began to bloom again. Tomatoes, basil, small yellow flowers whose names I never remembered but always loved. Calder was transferred to a rehabilitation wing. He could walk short distances with help now. His speech came back unevenly, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. Pain has a way of sharpening awareness when pride finally loosens its grip. I visited twice a week. Not out of duty, out of choice. Each visit changed him a little. He listened now. One afternoon we sat in the courtyard. Cicadas hummed in the trees. Calder watched an elderly couple walk by, the woman guiding her husband carefully. "I used to think needing someone made you weak," he said slowly. "Now I see it was refusing to need anyone that made me cruel." I said nothing. Some realizations need silence to settle. He looked at me. "Do you regret marrying me?" The question surprised me. Thought for a long time. "I regret shrinking myself," I said finally. "I regret believing love meant endurance. But marrying you taught me who I am not." He nodded. "That is fair." His children stopped visiting altogether. At first Calder made excuses for them. "They are busy. They have lives." Then one day he stopped. "They only loved what I could give," he said quietly. "Not who I was." I reached for his hand. "That realization hurts. But it frees you too." He squeezed my fingers weakly. "I never freed you when I should have." I smiled sadly. "You freed me the moment you showed me the truth." Home my life expanded. Maribel left an abusive relationship and started fresh in a neighboring town. She sent me photos of her son learning to ride a bike. She called me Aunt Eudora. The library asked me to lead a monthly women's circle. We talked about money, boundaries, aging, regret, hope. One woman in her 70s cried and said, "I thought it was too late to start over." I held her hand. "It is only too late when you are buried," I replied. Lucinda passed away quietly one morning. 93 years old. Peaceful. I sat with her family and listened to stories of a woman who had lived fiercely on her own terms. At her memorial, someone asked how I knew her. "She was my sister," I said. "Not by blood, by choice." That night I went home and added a line to my will. "Family is who shows up." Calder asked to see me urgently one afternoon. I arrived to find Hawthorne sitting beside his bed. "Eudora," Calder said, "I have finalized everything." Hawthorne slid papers toward me. Calder's remaining assets were modest. What mattered was the intention. He had left what he could to charities I supported. Scholarships, shelters, libraries. Nothing to his children. Rexton and Paloma would receive only personal items. Photographs, old watches, sentiment instead of money. "They are going to hate you," Hawthorne said gently. I shook my head. "They already do. And that is not my burden." Calder looked at me with wet eyes. "I want to say this while I still can," he said. "I was wrong about you. About women. About love. I leaned closer. Then say it to yourself every day, I replied. That is where it matters. His health declined again as autumn approached. He was not afraid. One evening as the leaves turned gold outside his window, he said something that stayed with me. You were never barren, Eudora. I kissed his forehead. Rest now, I whispered. He passed 2 weeks later. Quietly. In his sleep. At the funeral, Rexton and Paloma sat stiff and distant. They did not speak to me. I did not need them to. People I barely recognized came up to me. Nurses. Librarians. Former tenants. Women from the budgeting classes. They hugged me. They cried. They told me stories of how I helped them when no one else did. I stood there, an 82-year-old woman, surrounded by proof of a life well lived. Calder Boone was buried with his name etched in stone. But my legacy walked out of that chapel alive. And it was still growing. After the funeral, the house felt different again. Not empty. Not heavy. Just quiet in a way that felt earned. I stood alone in the living room the evening after Calder was buried, still wearing black. The sunlight slanted through the windows, catching dust in the air. For a moment I expected to hear his cough, his footsteps, comment about the thermostat. Nothing came. And for the first time silence felt like permission. The days that followed were busy in ways I had not anticipated. There were documents to sign. Counts to close. Letters to read. Calder had written more than I knew. Apologies he never had the courage to say aloud. Confessions about fear. About how watching me grow stronger terrified him because it reminded him of everything he had failed to become. I did not cling to the letters. I read them once. Then I placed them in the cedar chest and closed the lid. Some truths are not meant to be revisited. They are meant to be acknowledged and released. Rexton and Paloma did not call. Their lawyer did. He spoke in the careful tone of a man delivering disappointment. They are considering challenging the will, he said. I smiled gently. They can consider whatever they like, I replied. The truth will not change. He hesitated. They feel betrayed. He nodded. So did I. For many years. After that call, I felt something inside me finally loosen. A knot I had carried so long I had forgotten it was there. I began to dream again. Not dreams of regret or what might have been. Dreams of movement. Of open roads. Of standing in rooms filled with voices that welcomed me. One morning, as I watered the garden, my neighbor called out. You look busy, Eudora. Got plans? Smiled. Always do now. That was the truth. The women's circle at the library had grown. What started as a small group became a waiting list. Women came from nearby towns. Some with gray hair. Some barely past 30. All carrying stories of being told they were too much or not enough. We talked about money, yes. But also about boundaries. About late life reinvention. About the lie that a woman's worth expires with fertility. One afternoon, a woman named Renata spoke through tears. I gave my whole life to my husband and kids. Now I feel invisible. I took her hand. Visibility starts when you decide to see yourself, I said. The world follows eventually. She nodded. Others did too. At home, I began sorting through years of possessions. Donated clothes. Gave away furniture. Each item released felt like a breath returned to my lungs. Then I found something unexpected. A small box tucked behind old photo albums. Inside were letters written in a careful hand. My mother's handwriting. I had not seen them in decades. They were addressed to me. Never sent. She wrote about fear. About loving me but not knowing how to protect me. About believing suffering was normal because it was all she had known. I sat on the floor and cried for the girl I was and the woman she was becoming. I forgave her quietly. Forgiveness does not erase pain. Makes room for peace. Weeks later, a certified letter arrived. The court had dismissed Rexton and Paloma's challenge. No grounds. No standing. No inheritance beyond what Calder had chosen. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the envelope with my other important papers. Then I went outside and planted lavender. That night Maribel called. "Aunt Eudora," she said. "My son asked who you are." Smiled. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you are the woman who helped us start over." My throat tightened. "That is a good answer," I said. She hesitated. "He asked if you are his grandma." Closed my eyes. "If he wants me to be," I replied. "I would be honored." That was the moment something inside me settled completely. I had spent years believing motherhood was a door permanently closed to me. I had been wrong. Motherhood had simply taken a different shape. As autumn deepened, I received an invitation from the town council. They wanted to honor community contributors at the annual gathering. Someone had nominated me. I laughed when I read it. I almost declined. Then I remembered the girl who believed her life would never matter. Accepted. The night of the gathering, I stood at the podium, looking out at faces young and old. People I knew. People I did not. I spoke simply. I said I was once told that because I did not have children, my life would leave no mark. Pause. I said I believed that lie for a long time. The room was quiet. Then I said I was wrong. Applause filled the room. Not loud, but steady, honest. Afterward, a man approached me. Gray hair, kind eyes. "My wife passed last year," he said. "She would have loved your words." "I am sorry for your loss," I replied. He smiled. "I am learning that love does not disappear. Just changes where it lives." He nodded. Yes. As winter approached again, I realized something else. My story was not ending. It was expanding. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a utility bill and a handwritten note from the library director. It was cream-colored, heavier than most mail, with my name written carefully across the front. Eudora Maybelline Crowell. I turned it over slowly, as if the envelope itself might speak. Inside was an offer I never expected. A non-profit organization based in Minnesota had been following the work from our women's circle. One of the librarians had shared my story. Quietly, respectfully. They wanted to invite me to spend 3 months as a resident mentor at a small retreat center for older women who were rebuilding their lives after loss, divorce, or long years of silence. Housing provided. Travel covered. They did not want speeches. They did not want performances. They wanted presence. I sat at the table for a long time after reading it. My tea went cold. Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches of the trees. 3 months. My age, time feels different. It is no longer something you assume you have. It is something you choose how to spend. For the first time since Calder died, I felt uncertainty creep in. Not fear. That afternoon I drove out to the cemetery. The ground was hard with early frost. I stood beside Calder's grave, the stones still new. I did not speak aloud. I never had. But I thought the words clearly. I am not staying because of you. And I am not leaving because of you. I am choosing because I can. The wind moved through the grass like a soft dancer. That night I called Maribel. 3 months, she said softly. That is a long time. It is, I agreed. But it is also short. She was quiet for a moment. You deserve this, she said. You spent your life holding space for others. Let someone hold space for you. Smiled. I will miss you and the little one. He will miss you too, she replied. But we will be here when you come back. Lucinda's words echoed in my mind. Fear means you are alive. I accepted the invitation. The weeks before I left were full. I arranged the house. Paused commitments. Trusted others to continue the women's circle. They surprised me with a small send-off. Flowers. Hugs that lingered. One woman pressed a card into my hand. "You taught me it is not selfish to want more," she said. I boarded the bus with a single suitcase and a heart that felt lighter than it had in decades. The retreat center was quiet, set among pine trees and a lake that reflected the sky like glass. The women who arrived there came carrying grief that showed itself in different ways. Some loud, some invisible. I did not try to fix anyone. I listened, cooked with them, walked with them, sat in silence when words felt too heavy. One evening, a woman named Helene spoke. "I gave my whole life to raising children. Now they barely call. I do not know who I am without them." I looked at her gently. "You were someone before them. You were someone while raising them. You are still someone now." She cried. Others did too. Late one night, alone in my room, I realized something startling. I was happy. Not the fragile kind of happiness that depends on someone staying or behaving a certain way. The steady kind. The kind that comes from alignment. At 82, I was exactly where I was meant to be. At the end of the 3 months, the director asked me to stay longer. Smiled. "I will always return to Iowa," I said. "But I will come back again." When I returned home, spring was beginning again. The house welcomed me like an old friend. Familiar, honest. A small package waited on the table. Inside was a child's drawing. Crooked house. Stick figures. One labeled Grandma E. I laughed through tears. I hung it on the refrigerator. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, wrapped in a light blanket, listening to the world settle. I thought of the woman I was at 48. Standing in a borrowed dress. Believing love meant being chosen by someone else. I wished I could speak to her. I would tell her this. Your life will be bigger than you can imagine. Your worth will not come from who claims you. And one day you will be brave enough to choose yourself. The final chapter of my story was not about revenge. It was about arrival. I am 83 years old now. I wake up each morning in the same small house in northern Iowa, the one I once thought would become my prison and later learned was only ever a pause, not an ending. The walls hold memories, but they no longer trap me. They witness me. I move slower these days. My hands ache more in the mornings. My reflection has softened into someone I barely recognize from the woman I was at 48. And yet I have never felt more whole. Winning did not come with fireworks. Came with quiet. After I returned from the retreat, life settled into a rhythm that felt like my own. I reopened the women's circle, but this time I did not lead it alone. I trained others. Younger women. Older women. Women who once sat silently in the back and now spoke with steady voices. I learned something important then. True power does not cling. Creates room. Maribel's son came to stay with me for a weekend that summer. He spilled juice on my rug and laughed so hard he fell over. At night he asked me to tell him stories. Not fairy tales. Stories about my life. "Were you always old?" he asked seriously. I laughed. "No," I said. "I was young and scared once too." "Did you have kids?" I shook my head. "Well." He thought about that. "But you have me now," he said. Something warm and deep settled in my chest. "Yes," I replied. "You do." I did not correct him. I did not explain biology or timelines. Some truths do not need defending. At the library, a plaque was installed near the reading room. It bore my name and a simple sentence. "For building community with courage and kindness." I stood in front of it one afternoon alone. I ran my fingers over the letters. Not with pride. With gratitude. Calder's children never spoke to me again. I heard through others that Rexton struggled financially after making poor investments. That Paloma moved states twice chasing opportunity that never quite arrived. I felt no satisfaction in that. Only distance. Their lives were no longer lessons I needed to learn. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not leaving Calder sooner. I always answer honestly. I regret staying silent longer than I should have. But I do not regret the life that grew from my awakening. Because leaving is not always the victory people imagine. Sometimes staying long enough to reclaim yourself is the triumph. On the anniversary of Calder's death, I visited the cemetery once more. I brought no flowers, just myself. I stood there briefly. I hope you learned something, I said quietly. I did. Then I walked away without looking back. That is what winning looks like. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Not proving anything to anyone. Winning is waking up in a life that feels like it belongs to you. Winning is being surrounded by people who choose you, not because they must but because they want to. Winning is knowing that even without children of your own blood, you left fingerprints on the world that will not fade. If you are watching this and you have ever been told that your value depends on marriage, fertility, obedience, or silence, let me say this to you clearly. They were wrong. Your life does not expire because someone failed to see you. Your story does not end because you started late. And it is never too late to begin again. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video. Helps more people find stories like this. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional and powerful stories about strength, loss, and quiet victory. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter we share. And please tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read them. All of them. It reminds me that none of us are alone in this world. My name is Eudora Maybelline Crowell. I was once told I would leave nothing behind. They were wrong. And if you are still here listening, still breathing, still hoping, then maybe they were wrong about you too.